Mr. President, what's your message to Democrats who are concerned about your poll numbers?
My poll numbers, the last 5 polls you guys don't report, I'm winning.
Call it Super Tuesday for a reason. This is a big one. There's never been one like this. There's never been anything so conclusive. It's November 5th. It's right around the corner.
Former President Donald Trump saying there has never been a Super Tuesday as conclusive as his dominant display tonight, and the current president telling Democrats they should not be concerned with his poll numbers. Hello, I'm Mike Emanuel, and welcome to our special coverage of this Super Tuesday. Jillian, great to be working with you.
Good to be with you, Mike. At 1 a.m., I think we can call it extra special coverage.
Absolutely.
Super Tuesday. I'm Jillian Turner. The polls are now closed. Voters in 15 states, as well as American Samoa, took a trip to the ballot box on the biggest day of the 2024 primary race. On the Republican side, former President Trump continued his dominant performance as he looks to knock challenger Nikki Haley out the race once and for all. But the former South Carolina governor is not giving up, at least not yet. She picked up a solid victory in Vermont and is now vowing to keep bringing the fight.
When 70% of Americans said they don't want Donald Trump or Joe Biden, we're blessed to live in a country where we have elections. And that's what we wanted. I don't know why everybody's so adamant that they have to follow Trump's lead to get me out of this race. You know, all of these people deserve to vote.
On the left, President Biden taking nearly a clean sweep, losing only American Samoan Democratic caucuses. We are now fast approaching a 2020 general election rematch. For more live Super Tuesday coverage now, let's go to Fox News correspondent Kevin Core. Top of the morning to you, Kevin.
Top of the morning to you, Jillian. Not a clean bristle broom sweep for former President Trump tonight, as you pointed out, but you could say he broke out the Swiffer wet jet and mopping the floor with Ambassador Haley, at least among GOP voters. We'll get to that in just a moment, but first, a verdict in the Golden State that really sets the stage for a huge Senate battle coming up this fall, as Major League Baseball Hall of Famer California Republican Steve Garvey earns a shot at Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff in a bid to pick up the Senate seat left vacant by the passing of Dianne Feinstein. Schiff and Garvey finishing 1 and 2 in the voting in the Golden State. By the way, in that state, they send the top 2 vote getters to November to face off. Indeed, they will. Congresswoman Katie Porter finishing a distant third there. Meantime, former President Trump, as you also said, has had a buffo night. In fact, he also won in the Golden State, picking up the state's massive haul of 169 delegates, part of a night that saw Mr. Trump win all but one of the states contested on Super Tuesday. Governor Haley did manage a victory in Vermont, but given the state of the race, she has inarguably a very difficult decision to make in the coming days. So here's where things stand at this hour as we take a look. Super Tuesday, well, the delegate map, well, the math is really the math. Let's face it, former President Trump is well on his way. Ditto for his Democratic likely opponent in Joe Biden. As for the other inside the numbers look that we can share with you, it's really been obviously a very big Trump night. 751 to 62, only needing 1,215. Still more on the board tonight, and likely a strong chance at a victory coming up next week. By the way, I should also point this out. His remarks, the former president's remarks tonight, Jillian, were relatively subdued, but he talked about the need to come together. Just how soon Nikki Haley decides to do that is anyone's guess at this hour. Back to you.
So some people speculating as soon as tomorrow. Kevin, got to leave it there. We'll check back with you a little later. Thanks.
Or maybe it's later today.
Or what? Yes, maybe it's today, actually, if we're going to get technical about it.
All right. For a reaction to the Super Tuesday results, we are joined now by our panel, Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall, Fox News political analyst Gianno Caldwell, and John Bussey, associate editor at the Wall Street Journal. Panelists, welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Hi, nice to see you.
Leslie, lead us off. What are your key takeaways from Super Tuesday?
Well, I have a lot of them. First, not tons of surprises. Maybe you could say American Samoa, a surprise with Joe Biden. not today. Washington, D.C. wasn't that much of a surprise. Vermont, not a total surprise. I was more surprised from my home state of Massachusetts. I actually thought Nikki Haley might pull out Massachusetts. I thought she would do better with those numbers. But numbers, speaking of Mike, that surprised me, are in Vermont. How many Democrats voted for Nikki Haley and how many Republicans in all of the exit polling and all of the interviews are saying it was more of a vote and a symbolic vote, if you will, against Donald Trump than it was necessarily for Nikki Haley and Joe Biden. And one more number, 48%. Not just in Vermont, but in many states, it's around the number of Nikki Haley voters that say they'll vote for Joe Biden.
Gianna, what's your assessment of tonight's Super Tuesday performance?
Well, I thought that Donald Trump, obviously he's sweeping the field here, but there's only one person. And as we look ahead to the general election, I'm thinking about the notable things that Donald Trump must do to unite the party in order to beat Joe Biden. And I'm looking at the exit polling specifically from North Carolina, California, and Virginia, but North Carolina being a swing state, 78% of Haley voters in North Carolina won't commit necessarily to the nominee. And that would be Donald Trump. That's going to be an issue for Donald Trump as he tries to unite the party. If I were advising his campaign, I would say that you absolutely need to look at those Haley voters, women, especially suburban women and independents. And I know she brought in a number of Democrats to support her candidacy to try to get Trump out of the race. I would say you need to look at those particular groups and you need to make concentrated efforts to try to get them back on board so you can unite the party and hopefully win the general election.
John, what about your takeaways?
Well, no surprises. This was expected, the results tonight. I think that what we're going to see now is the data dump that we get from tonight. This is in exit polling. It's in interviews with voters. Mind you, this is the core of the core that came out tonight for both candidates. These are people who wanted to vote in a primary that was pretty much a foregone conclusion in almost all of these states. So are we really getting a representative sense of the voter out there? I'm not sure we are. And I think that this issue of how many voters in the case of Trump, but also to a certain degree in Biden, are going to stay home because they're unhappy with either candidate. I'm not sure we're going to get that data either from this core voting pattern this evening. Right. We're going to have to see in some of the polling that comes out after this how many voters for Trump and Biden just didn't show up and may not in November.
Leslie, now that the race is what voters are calling and analysts are calling existential, do you really think it's likely that these risky Biden voters may stay home? That is, Democrats who are dissatisfied with the job he's doing when push comes to shove.
Well, if you stay home or if you're uncommitted, I've said before and I'll say it again, and you're a Democrat and you're not going to vote for Joe Biden, then you are voting for Donald Trump with your inaction or your lack of commitment. At the end of the day, this is a very tight race. And I read somewhere, and I had to laugh, that the polling for Americans' attitudes toward a rematch between the current president and the former president is like a colonoscopy without anesthesia. And so there isn't, hello, we'll take that in for a moment. There isn't, the enthusiasm necessarily, but I think there is the enthusiasm of, I don't want that guy from both sides to the opponent. But because it is so tight, it is going to come down to, a handful of states. It's going to come down to a slither of voters, perhaps many independents in those states, perhaps a lot of youth in those states. And if a few people stay home, that's not going to be a huge deal. But if a larger margin does, that could be problematic. And it could be problematic for both candidates.
Leslie, Giano, and of course, John, thank you very much. Plenty more questions for you throughout the show, but we got to go for now.
In the run-up to Super Tuesday, a lot of voters not thrilled about the prospect of a rematch between President Biden and Trump. Some Minnesota voters now are among that group. Joining us live is Minnesota GOP Chairman David Hahn. David, thanks for being with us. What do you make about this 19% non-committed voters in your state tonight?
Well, I think that the turnout for this primary was a little bit lower than expected, certainly on the Democratic side. I think that, to me, is one of the biggest takeaways from this, is that Donald Trump, who is going to clearly win, it's not quite, all the votes are not quite in, but I think Donald Trump is clearly going to win. But he's outpolled Biden in almost every one of the congressional districts across the state. I think that is an indication of just how unpopular President Biden is, and just what a close race this is going to be in Minnesota. I think Minnesota is going to be one of the battleground states in the coming election.
We heard in polls leading up to tonight, or leading up to last night, I should say, especially from young voters, there's a lot of discontent with both the front-runner candidates, not sure which way a key contingent of people is going to swing ultimately. Take a listen to this, some sound from a few of them.
I'll be voting for Joe Biden, like I did 4 years ago.
To be honest, I don't like either one of them, to be honest.
I think another Biden-Trump rematch would probably be easy game for Trump.
It absolutely will not be Biden. It will not be Biden. Absolutely will not be Biden.
Interestingly, further polling inside your state, as you well know, showed that a lot of people who are discontent with both candidates are unhappy with more than one issue, meaning it's not just the southern border, it's not just the economy that's making them unhappy.
Yeah, I think the public safety issue in Minnesota is a big thing. I think certainly the economy is a huge issue, but there are a lot of issues that I think voters are dissatisfied with, and I think the recent polling we saw here from one of our news outlets is that President Biden is deeply unpopular, and I think that is a huge issue. I think that obviously there is lots of debate about Donald Trump as a candidate, and Nikki Haley did a pretty good showing here in Minnesota. But I think the deep unpopularity of President Biden and his policies is going to make a huge difference in this election. And the polling shows that this is a very, very close election, and the fact that the primary votes today show that Joe Biden is really behind Donald Trump in terms of enthusiasm among voters.
Take a listen to this sound about the southern border. I want to get your response.
Terrified about this election. We'll see how this goes down in November. We will see how animated people are with the outcome.
Well, that obviously was not sound about the southern border. That was a voter talking about that being terrified of this election cycle, something we spoke about a moment ago. Why do you think it is that a contingent of Minnesota voters say that they're feeling terrified? Meaning this is on a knife's edge. They could see it going either way in a general.
Well, again, I think that the policies of the Biden administration have deeply affected people in Minnesota across the country. But the inflationary tendencies we've seen, the lack of growth in the economy, I think in foreign policy, the kinds of missteps that the Biden administration has made that have made the world a far more dangerous place, and certainly the border issues affect everybody here in Minnesota. We're a huge agricultural state, lots of need for lots of workers, but there's great concern about whether or not the border is being managed in a way that is going to be helpful to the country. These are all issues that people across the state of Minnesota are very concerned with, and I understand that there's a lot of kind of angst about, do we want to have a Biden-Trump rematch? But if it comes down to that, I think Donald Trump is clearly the winner, and I think he could very easily make Minnesota a Republican presidential state for the first time since 1972.
All right. Well, David, thanks for staying up late with us. We appreciate it. Appreciate your analysis of what went down last night. We hope to talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks.
Jillian, it's looking more and more like we will see a Trump-Biden rematch this November. But if Nikki Haley decides to drop out, would she throw her support fully behind Mr. Trump, or would she challenge both of them? More on that next.
We have a great Republican Party with tremendous talent, and we want to have unity, and we're going to have unity, and it's going to happen very quickly. And I have been saying lately, success will bring unity to our country.
Welcome back, voters coast to coast, making their voices heard on Super Tuesday. Two top-tier issues on the ballots this go-round were immigration and the economy. Joining us now to take a deep dive look at what topics are on the top of the list for voters is Fox News national correspondent Matt Finn. Hey, Matt.
Hi, Julian. In our latest Fox News poll, 1,200 registered voters were randomly selected nationwide, and the number one issue they say they voted on is the economy. 37% of voters say the economy is the most pressing issue for them. Right behind that, 21% say immigration is the second most important topic. I spent weeks and weeks reporting all across the southern border in Texas. I've witnessed the immigration crisis firsthand and do not find it surprising that voters in this poll rank immigration so high. Behind immigration, abortion, and healthcare. Now, taking a closer look at immigration, 78% of voters in the Fox News poll say the U.S. southern border is an emergency or a major problem. That's down slightly from 85% in October, but still substantially higher compared to February 2019. Now, President Biden and former President Trump swept Super Tuesday elections across the country tonight. One interesting development this evening among Democratic voters in Minnesota, a state which has a large population of Muslim Americans. 44,000 Democratic voters there, or roughly 20% of tonight's turnout so far, did not vote for President Biden. Rather, they voted uncommitted as a form of protest, demanding Biden call for a ceasefire in Gaza.
This time I am voting uncommitted. I believe that the war in Gaza and the genocide that Israel is committing is unacceptable, and Joe Biden has not done enough to earn my vote and not done enough to stop the war, stop the massacre.
Now, in the state of Michigan last week, a similar protest there, more than 100,000 people, or 13% of all voters, voted uncommitted in that state's Democratic primary. Julian, Mike.
All right, Matt Finn live in LA for us this hour. Thank you.
Sure.
Julian, another major question going into Super Tuesday. Will Nikki Haley run as a third-party candidate? She took that question head-on yesterday, saying her place is in the Republican Party and that she has no plans to run as an independent or under the no labels label. For more on this, we turn to Firehouse Strategies' Katie McCutcheon. She's also a former communications director for Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, who also chose not to run for president under the No Labels Party. Katie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for staying up with us.
Of course.
So your old boss, Senator Manchin, and former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan decided to pass on no labels. Is that because essentially they viewed that as being a spoiler?
I think that's right, and I also think that over the last couple of months, as No Labels and potential candidates has kind of went across the country to see if there's an appetite for this type of candidate. Let's not forget, this isn't a normal third party. This would have been a split ticket. Mm-hmm. So they've went across the country, seen if there's an appetite, and there doesn't seem to be one. And I think that Politico article that came out this week that they interviewed No Labels donors with, and they pretty much said No Labels doesn't really have a plan to either ensure that they can get on more ballots across the country, and also there's no transparency on how they're going to recruit and vet a candidate because there's no other obvious option at this point.
Separately, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is teasing a potential second switch in this primary cycle to running as a libertarian. Is that something that No Labels factors into their decision making? I mean, you don't want a Democratic race suddenly or a primary race that's chock-a-block full with third-party candidates.
Yeah. I don't think it necessarily is in the No Labels calculation. I think it's probably in the calculation of where he can pull the most votes, right? So I think he's kind of gone about the presidential election in a couple of different, capacities. And so he's trying to figure out where he can get on the ballot, in what party platform he can get on the ballot, and where he can pull the most votes. And, I think he said today that he has certified for the Nevada ballot, but that doesn't mean that that's official yet. So, and he's not going to certify for all 50 states. So I think it's kind of these third-party candidates are trying to figure out where they can pull the most from, who it's going to benefit, and if it's going to benefit them at all.
Did No Labels blow it by kind of openly flirting publicly with some of these politicians like Senator Manchin and Governor Hogan?
I don't know if I would say blow it, but I do think they miscalculated like I said, the appetite for this type of candidate, the frustrations for both a rematch from 2020, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I think there was this belief that it was because both of these candidates are so extreme. So there's a really big pocket in the middle to pull from, and those people would be interested in a split party candidate. But the facts of the matter are Democrats, the small pocket that, we kind of saw today as they voted uncommitted, are the progressive side of the party that they believe that Joe Biden is not liberal enough. And Republicans are frustrated with their option as Donald Trump, as he's not a real conservative. He's not a real Republican. He's not the Reagan Republican of our yesteryear. And they would not be satisfied with the split ticket either. So I think there was kind of this momentum going in that there would be an appetite for this type of candidate, but both parties, as we've seen today, it's just not there.
Katie McCutcheon, rock solid at 1:25 in the morning. Well done. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Well, they call it Super Tuesday for a reason. A third of all delegates needed are up for grabs. So both Trump and Biden had good nights, but how far are they now from clinching their party's nominations? We're going to break down the numbers for you coming up next.
President Biden and former President Trump sailing to easy victories in several states after voters cast their ballots on Super Tuesday. Fox News correspondent Connor Hansen joins us live with more from New York. Hello, Connor.
Mike, so far President Biden and former President Trump won almost every state tonight, setting up a likely November matchup. The only exceptions were Nikki Haley's win in Vermont and Biden's loss in American Samoa to a relatively unknown challenger.
This was an amazing night.
Shortly after polls closed, both frontrunners took decisive victories in several states. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump aren't leaving much room for their competition. Biden and Trump sweeping states like Arkansas, Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina.
They call it Super Tuesday for a reason. This is a big one. This has never been anything so conclusive.
President Biden releasing a statement saying in part, quote, "Today, millions of voters across the country made their voices heard, showing that they're ready to fight back against Donald Trump's extreme plan to take us backwards." Nikki Haley down in delegate numbers, but not out yet.
All of these people deserve to vote. 16 states want to have their voices heard. Let's let their voices get heard. I think it's as pro-American as it gets. That's where democracy. We don't anoint kings in America. We let people have choices.
She's been gaining traction with independent voters.
Well, I don't want her to quit because I think we all need a voice, as an independent voter especially.
And Nikki Haley did put out a statement celebrating her Vermont win, but did not say if she's staying in the race. And another high-profile matchup is setting up in California. Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff will face off against former professional baseball player Steve Garvey for the empty Senate seat left by the late Dianne Feinstein. Reporting live, Connor Hansen, Fox News.
Connor Hansen, thanks very much.
So what actually makes Super Tuesday super is the delegate count. More than a third of all delegates in play in both Republican Democratic primaries were up for grabs last night. Former President Trump is currently, as it stands, at 751. He needs the magic number of 1,215 in order to clinch the nomination. But when exactly can we expect that to happen? Let's ask our panel. Bring in Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall, Fox News political analyst John O'Caldwell, and John Bussey, associate editor at the Wall Street Journal. John, it was an astonishingly redemptive week for the former president with the Supreme Court ruling, then tonight's sweep, or near sweep, I guess minus Vermont. It puts him on an sort of undeniable track to the nomination, but almost more importantly than that, puts him back in play in the general.
Yes, it does. And I think that we saw that taking shape over the last several months in polling. And additional primaries on the 12th and 19th of this month are likely to put him over the delegate count needed. So then what happens? We go to the issues. And in that regard, this is a much kind of more touchy, uncertain election. The former president will be pounding on border issues. President Biden will be talking about abortion and the fact that former President Trump put a Supreme Court in that reversed Roe versus Wade. The Biden administration is going to be pounding on the economy. I think if they're smart at this point, because it's a really strong economy. 3.3% GDP growth in the fourth quarter of last year, tremendous job growth, inflation having been slashed. They're going to have to message that to voters. They're going to have to explain inflation is not as a result of Biden policies. It was a result of the pandemic and supply chain disruptions that began with the former president and continued under Biden. It was not the fault of either of these two presidents. So now we get down to the issues. And we get down also to the fact that we have a candidate running who has been convicted of business fraud, who has been convicted of sexual harassment and of defamation, and has a lot of other court cases that are in the works and could be decided against him in the middle of this campaign.
Gianno, I'm noticing the numbers going by on the screen. For example, in Utah, Nikki Haley got nearly 33% of the vote. It was a huge, huge night for former President Trump. Let me be clear about that. But should he have tonight started the healing process with more outreach to Haley and her voters?
Well, I think so. And I think that I'm sorry.
I think you're referring to me, right?
Yes, Gianno.
You know, he won this election, and she hasn't come out and given a speech, even after having won Vermont. And I'm wondering what is she thinking her next steps are. And I can't imagine that there's any conclusion she can draw that she can potentially win this. That doesn't exist. No path exists for her. As I look forward, I do wish that Donald Trump would reach out to her supporters, which he has multiple times before, but she has to get out of the race, plain and simple. And as we look ahead to the general election, because we know this is going to be between Donald Trump and Joe Biden in 7 key swing states here, we have Donald Trump beating Joe Biden on average by 5 points, North Carolina being one of those very important swing states. Now, what I do wonder, because I was listening to the coverage with Britt Hume speaking, saying that many voters acknowledge and notice that Joe Biden is old and what some may consider senile. I do agree with that analysis from Britt. But what I do wonder with these swing states that he's losing in, how is he going to go out and campaign? Is he going to go do rallies? Like, what does it look like? Because I saw him with Karen Bass in L.A. Shaking hands, and he had to hold on to handrails. It's not a good look for somebody running for president, considering all the issues that are going on in the country and the fact that he loses his train of thought. There's a lot of issues on the Joe Biden side, which is going to put him in peril when it comes to Donald Trump, who definitely has the energy to go out there and win races. Joe Biden simply doesn't. So we're looking ahead, but it's not looking too good for Joe Biden.
Well, Leslie, to that point, the president was MIA today. He chose, or last night, I should say, he chose not to give a speech. This was a huge night for him. I mean, he took all the states, swept all the states where he was up, 15 of them. Why do you think he decided to stay silent? And do you think that he should have addressed his voters?
No. I mean, I think we get, and no, with all due respect to Gianno, I love you, but, you would see, double digit, 10, 20, 30 plus percentage point differences in margins if Joe Biden, if it was just, so impossible. No, it's not impossible. We're a divided country. It's almost 50-50. The president, despite his poll numbers we've seen in midterms, we saw in Ohio, and we're going to see in the general election enthusiasm from my party and from people that don't want Donald Trump and felt and feels that he hijacked the Republican Party to take the party over again. And a lot of people are just like, we don't want to go back, we want to go forward. But to the point about the president, this is not about victory laps, and there is no victory for Joe Biden. Really, he's probably not going to be the nominee until March 19th. Donald Trump's probably not going to be the nominee till March 12th. These are two very different people with different ideas. But they also have very different styles, and it's Donald Trump's style to, come out take a victory lap every 5 minutes. It's not Joe Biden's, and I think it's okay, especially when we're highlighting every single thing that these guys do from now until the election. Panelists, thanks very much. We'll see you a little later in the show.
The U.S. Supreme Court handing former President Trump a major victory this week, unanimously ruling that he could stay on Colorado's primary ballot. The decision comes after months of debate over whether he violated the 14th Amendment's insurrectionist clause. Now, many are left wondering what implications this could have on the presidential race as a whole. Colorado Democratic Chairman Shad Marib joins us now with his take. Shad, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So what do you think the impact was of the Supreme Court in terms of the race we saw in Colorado, and did it energize Republicans in your state?
Well, look, this was a nonpartisan lawsuit that was brought forth independently by even some Republicans in our state, and it's important that the court gave the nation clarity on this important issue. But the fact is that no president has created more jobs than Joe Biden. We have record unemployment, not just across the nation, but also including in Latino and Black communities. That's because of the policies of Joe Biden, and that's why Americans are going to reward him with another 4 years in the White House.
But back to the case, your state and 30 some others were hoping to really duke it out with the former president in the courts. That was sort of shut down this week by that SCOTUS decision, made very clear to the party that they're going to have to face the former president head on at the ballot box. It's not an easy pill, I imagine, for a lot of Democrats to swallow. This had been the big hope.
Well, the story of this election is starting to become really clear. Joe Biden is overperforming every poll, and Donald Trump is underperforming every single poll. Right here in Colorado, Joe Biden won 85% of his voters tonight, and Donald Trump was lucky to crack 60%. And so Donald Trump and the RNC have a big problem on their hands. How are they going to unify their party? They're in a huge amount of disarray, and they're going to have to answer for their war on women and their war on farmers and ranchers across this country with their misguided trade wars. They killed a border deal, and those are the issues that Americans are really going to be going to the ballot box for this fall.
We know the Denver area is traditionally blue, while lots of other parts of your state are red. What's your analysis about whether your state's purple now, or is it a blue state?
Hey, we take nothing for granted, and we're focusing on local races where we've never really competed, and that's why you're seeing the Democratic Party win elections in places like the San Luis Valley in South Colorado. We're winning in places like Loveland and the Eastern Plains, places we've never used to compete in. And it shows that when Democrats show up with a positive message about cutting the cost of living, making sure we're creating jobs in rural communities, and supporting our farmers and ranchers, we can win in these important areas.
You mentioned some of the areas, the issues, that are going to drive Democrats to the polls this election cycle. You mentioned the border, you mentioned the economy, but the reality for the president is that 66% of voters disapprove of the job he's doing on immigration. 62% disapprove of the job he's doing on the economy as of this week. This is latest Fox News polling.
Well, as they say, the only poll that matters is the one on election day. And so far, the story of this election is that Joe Biden is overperforming these polls. Donald Trump keeps losing by more than anybody thought he would. And that's because President Biden is fighting for our freedoms while Donald Trump is trying to rip them away. President Biden is taking on these big corporations and taking on hidden fees while Donald Trump is promising more giveaways to billionaires and these irresponsible corporations. And people are picking up on that. And that's why I think you see Donald Trump having such a big problem, barely able to crack 60% in a lot of these states across the country. And he's even lost 2 states. Joe Biden hasn't lost a state yet.
I'm surprised to hear you mention hidden fees. That's hardly an election-winning issue for anybody.
I think people care about their pocketbooks, and they're seeing big corporations get wealthier and wealthier, and their wages have barely gone up. Thanks to Joe Biden, that's starting to change, and I think that's why Americans are going to reward him and Kamala Harris with another 4 years. We're still digging out of the wreckage of Donald Trump's failed administration.
All right, Chad, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Let's turn to the other side of the aisle now. Dave Williams is Colorado's Republican Party chairman. So what do you make of the Supreme Court's historic ruling and its impact on tonight?
I think it was an absolutely historic ruling, that one that needed to be done, and it was a repudiation of what the Democrats were doing. My counterpart can blame this case on nonpartisan actors, but the truth is they were funded by left-wing Democrat groups to try and disrupt Donald Trump and engage in election interference, because they are desperate to not face off against Donald Trump because they know they're going to lose come November.
Do you really think that there were, in 36 states is the number of states that were challenging the former president on the same issue? You think they were all funded, the secretaries of state were all funded by Democratic operatives?
Well, the litigation for sure. The litigation that would go to the various district courts, especially in Colorado, they were funded by left-leaning dark money groups. Crew is not a Republican-leaning, right-leaning organization. That is funded by George Soros and other left-leaning groups and moneyed interests. So it's clear to us that it was an election interference. And if Joe Biden wants to win this at the ballot box, then he needs to do it on his own, just like President Trump said when the ruling came down on Monday.
What are the keys to the eventual Republican nominee winning Colorado in November?
I think it's very simple. I think it's immigration and it's the economy, and connected to that is the reckless spending that we're seeing under the Joe Biden administration. People are hurting, despite what my counterpart said. People are not thriving under the Joe Biden economy. In fact, it's the opposite. People are hurting. They're having a tough time making ends meet and paying for their basic necessities. I think it's going to come back to bite them in the butt. And once we get Donald Trump the nomination here and focus on the general election, we're going to make a strong case to secure the border and bring jobs back to America.
What do you say to Colorado Republican voters who are wary of the drama and the chaos that seems to accompany the former president wherever he travels?
Well, look, he's not the one bringing the chaos. He's trying to stand up for so many Americans that have been forgotten by the powers that be. We shouldn't be surprised by the attacks that are coming from the left or those who want to keep the status quo. That's to be expected. When he's standing up for the American worker, when he's standing up for families all across this country and trying to do right by them, we shouldn't be surprised when the swamp strikes back. We shouldn't be surprised when those who don't want him to return to the White House fund litigation to try and remove him from the ballot so people can't support him. These things are bound to happen, but it's always darkest before the dawn, and thank God the dawn is coming. Donald Trump's going to win in November, and everyone knows it.
Dave Williams in a cool movie-inspired office. Dave, thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks for staying up with us. Well, some good news for former President Trump is that President Biden is now losing some of the support that he had amassed 4 years ago. A new New York Times and Siena College poll shows he's retaining just 83% of his 2020 supporters. 10% of those folks have even switched sides. Is there a way he can still turn things around? We're going to get into that next. All right, welcome back. Several polls now put both Trump and Haley ahead of President Biden. Now the Washington Post editorial board says Biden should ignore the liberal wish list. It says all he really needs to do to beat Trump is one thing, and that is secure the southern border. Joining us to weigh in on this is Julian Epstein, former House Oversight Committee staff director. Do you like that idea? I mean, obviously it's a policy goal for Republicans. But is that true? Meaning if he could fix that, solve that crisis, would it be smooth?
He has to fix
sailing?
a lot more, but what he has to do is he should use that as a template and sort of reject what has become the de facto Democratic Party policymaking apparatus, which is the campaign activists, the donors, and the sort of social media overlords who have dictated the policy to go far left on a whole host of issues, including immigration. Immigration has been a disaster for this president. Upwards of 70 to even 80% in some polls think the president has had a terrible policy with open borders. If you just look at what's happening in blue cities, Democratic strongholds, they have had a meltdown when asked to handle just a small thimbleful of the migrant surge that border states have had to handle. And if you look at one of the president's biggest problems right now, Jillian, he is hemorrhaging support amongst not just white working class voters, but black and Hispanic working class voters who are all aware, many of whom don't like his position on immigration, and who are all aware that immigration is this sort of mass open border unassimilated immigration coming in 8-9 million voters is driving down wages for the working class. So what the Washington Post is suggesting is a Sister Souljah moment. And the question is whether the president would really take that seriously and do sort of what Bill Clinton did in 1992 when he famously rejected the far left positions on things like crime and really do something to close the borders. And what I fear what Biden will do in the State of the Union on Thursday is he will sort of two sides it. He will try to have it both ways. Same way as what he's doing on Israel. What he's saying on Israel is we have to defeat Hamas, but Israel, scale back your efforts. And those two things are somewhat contradictory. What I think he'll do on immigration is say, well, I'll take segments of what happened, of what the Langford bill was, and I will try to implement those administratively, and then I will berate the Republicans for not passing legislation. And that dog is not going to hunt. First and foremost, as good a guy as Senator Langford was, and as genuine effort as it was, that bill would still allow 2 million migrants to come into the country every year. And that's just a position that I think the public doesn't support at this point. I think the bill was too far left, with all due respect to Senator Langford. And the president will then say, so, you know, we can supplement that with administrative actions. The public doesn't want that. What the president has to do is close the borders effectively, and he could simply say asylum applicants could be processed out of country. But I fear the president, who is sensitive to the criticisms of the progressive left and is beholden, or not sensitive, beholden to the far progressive left of the party, which is different from when I was serving on the Judiciary and Oversight Committees. Sure. I fear the president will try to have it both ways and try to satisfy everyone. And at the end of the day, he will lose that argument to Donald Trump because the public is so upset that the Democratic Party and the president has moved so far left on this issue in a way that's just untenable for the country.
But with just 8 months left on the calendar, right, until the general election, that's like an eternity in politics, but it's not very long in terms of policy making. Could Biden even start to turn things around between now and then, realistically?
On immigration or
generally? On the border.
On immigration, he could do it tomorrow. I mean, the Supreme Court ruled on this in 2018. The president can close the border tomorrow with a stroke of the pen. What is subject to litigation is when he tries to do things like change individual asylum policies, or say asylum can only be processed at borders, but not out at ports of entry, not outside. If he closes the border tomorrow, he doesn't have a challenge legally. He could do it tomorrow.
We got to leave it there.
And that's what the public wants.
Stick with us because we got more live coverage coming up next.
We have a great Republican Party with tremendous talent, and we want to have unity, and we're going to have unity, and it's going to happen very quickly. And I have been saying lately, success will bring unity to our country.
Well, former President Trump says the Republican Party is going to unify quickly now as he dominates the ballot boxes and marches closer to a rematch with President Biden. Welcome back. I'm Jillian Turner. Welcome to continuing special coverage of Super Tuesday out of Washington. Great to be with you, Mike.
You know, Jillian, I told the bosses I'd work with you anytime, day or night, and here we are. Thrilled to be with you.
Took that literally, because here we are at 2 a.m. on Super Tuesday.
A big night in American politics. The polls are now closed as voters in 15 states and American Samoa took a trip to the ballot boxes on the biggest day of the 2024 primary race. On the Republican side, former President Trump continued his commanding performance as he looks to eliminate challenger Nikki Haley out of the race once and for all. But the former South Carolina governor not giving up yet as she picked up a solid victory in Vermont and vows to keep bringing the fight.
If I were to get out of the race, it would still be the longest presidential general election in history. I don't know why everybody's so adamant that they have to follow Trump's lead to get me out of this race.
On the Democratic side, President Joe Biden nearly with a clean sweep, only losing American Samoa in the Democratic caucus there. For more on our Super Tuesday coverage, we now turn to Fox News correspondent Kevin Corke. Hello, Kevin.
Evening, Mike, or rather good morning to you and to Jillian. Former President Trump Tuesday won, well, he won some more, including in the Golden State of California, where he picked up the state's 169 delegates, part of a massive haul on a night where there were delegates aplenty in play. But while Ambassador Nikki Haley crisscrossed the country in the days before the voting on Tuesday, hoping to pull off a few upsets. Well, those, frankly, were few and far between. Yes, a win in Vermont and a few stronger than expected finishes were overshadowed, frankly, by a number of blowout losses and, most importantly, a crushing delegate defeat at the hands of the former president. So you may be wondering at this hour, where do things stand? Well, right now, former President Trump is rolling, and I mean rolling like an offensive lineman sitting in a grocery cart headed downhill in San Francisco, picking up steam. And delegates, for that matter, by the hundreds. Look at that number, 757 and more on the way. No word on when Governor Haley will bow out, but the proverbial writing is obviously on the wall. Meanwhile, back in the Golden State, the stage has been set for a huge Senate battle this fall as Major League Baseball Hall of Famer and California Republican Steve Garvey earns a shot at Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff in a bid to pick up the Senate seat left vacant by the passing of Dianne Feinstein. Schiff and Garvey finishing 1 and 2 in the voting. That sends the top vote getters to the November ballot. Congresswoman Katie Porter finishing a distant third. And speaking of the Democrats, President Biden, pretty easy go of it on Tuesday, winning all but American Samoa in the primary. And this is all happening in a week that saw Michelle Obama officially say, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to run. So it appears to be Biden or bust for the party. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Kyrsten Sinema. She's not going to run for Senate in Arizona for re-election. That means another key battle to keep an eye on as we have a very busy fall ahead, guys. Back to you.
Kevin Cork starting us off. Kevin, many thanks.
You bet.
Thanks, Kevin. Well, former President Trump's dominating the Republican primaries. Nikki Haley, though, is still in this race. Does she have a path? We're joined by the panel. Once again, Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall, Fox News political analyst John O'Caldwell, and John Bussey, associate editor at the Wall Street Journal. Let's start, Leslie, with the fact that Haley's now picked up victories in Washington, D.C. and Vermont, making her the first female Republican to prevail in any primary race. Kayleigh McEnany pointed out earlier this evening that in fact makes her the most successful female Republican politician in presidential political history. Does she have a path remaining forward, or is this the end of the line for her?
First, I'm really glad that you mentioned the first woman. I mean, you got to give her, the kudos for that. She's, the first state and the second state, right? I mean, the District of Columbia, and then, of course, Vermont. But speaking to the path, let's just look at numbers. And that's what politics is, right? It's numbers. How many people vote? How many votes do you get? General election, your electoral college, boom, you make it to that magic number, you win. And it's the same way in the primary. Right now, the former president, Donald Trump, has approximately 951 of the 1215 that he needs, 1,215. But Nikki Haley has 80. So I just don't see a path. I'm not a math major, but I just don't see a path. The numbers just aren't there for her. It just doesn't add up. She has no appearances planned after today. She didn't plan on, and she is not going to be speaking and making a speech, about what happened tonight. She was grateful and thankful and gave a shout out to Vermont. But like I said, I just don't see a path going forward.
John, if this is the end of the road for Nikki Haley's campaign, does she deserve credit for being the runner-up to the former president, outlasting all the other guys?
Yes. And she's, not somebody that I think that the electorate at this point is really going to focus on much longer. She's kind of out. She may be sort of hoping for a Hail Mary in this, a conviction of the president on one of the 4 outstanding indictments that he still has to contend with this year. But none of those are coming to the juries anytime soon or to resolution anytime soon. So it's kind of hard to see how even that would sway enough of Trump's core voters to vote for her. I think what you're seeing is a positioning for the next presidential election. She's been a compelling candidate. An alternative to Donald Trump, but clearly not one that the voters are choosing this time around.
At what point, Jono, does Haley staying in become a political liability for her own political career going forward? Lindsey Graham on another channel tonight already called for her to pull out of the race. He said he knows her well and called her a team player, indicating if she cares about what's best for the party, she better call it.
Well, I think we're already in that territory, to be honest, and certainly she has been a very compelling voice, especially when talking about the issues of abortion and reaching out to suburban women and independents, and clearly she's gained some Democrats, and that's how she's been able to rack up some numbers. But yeah, this is her time to exit stage right, I believe. And as I keep saying, because we're talking about Nikki Haley, there is no path for her. We have to focus on the general election, and I'm reminded of what John said in the last hour. He believed that Joe Biden has a great economic message when it comes to jobs and the economy, and he talked about the inflation data being down. The truth of the matter is the inflation data is down, but prices are up. The truth of the matter is when it comes to the economy, many Americans have a very negative view. Fox News polling in December showed that 93% of Republicans have a negative view, 85% of independents, and 61% of Democrats. And when asked on a very important question, Biden economic policy impact, only 14% of those people said that they believe that his policies have helped them. So as we're talking about this, and I know Leslie in the last hour too, and seemingly John thinks that there is a really strong positioning for Joe Biden, I happen to disagree with both of my colleagues on that issue, because we're looking at immigration. 70% of Americans believe that Joe Biden is mishandling the immigration issue. 325,000 people flown in to the United States, and I'm pretty sure that was done because Joe Biden's administration didn't want the Fox News cameras to see the people coming across the border, so they're trying to kind of hide it in a way. This is not this is not the right set of circumstances that any incumbent would want to run on. It's a very difficult one, and as we look forward, I think it's incumbent upon Donald Trump and the Republican Party to absolutely get to Nikki Haley, as many of those voters as possible, and start building those bridges. And Nikki Haley should be a part of that process.
All right, panel, stick with us. We'll circle back to you again later in the hour. Thanks so much.
The race to replace the late Senator Dianne Feinstein continues to heat up. Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff took the victory in the California Senate primary. Schiff will now face off in November against former Los Angeles Dodgers superstar first baseman Steve Garvey, who's running on the Republican side. For more on this, let's bring in the California GOP chairwoman, Jessica Milan Patterson. Jessica, welcome.
Hey, great to be with you guys tonight.
So what do you make of Adam Schiff's tactics, elbowing in effect two Democratic congresswomen out of the way and elevating Steve Garvey? Do you think he will regret that?
I hope so. And I think this gives Californians a great opportunity to really have a choice come November. If Katie Porter or Barbara Lee had made it into the general election, you would have had the choice between two very similar, if not the exact same types of people. DC insiders who have created many of the problems here in California. Now you get to see what the difference between going for an outsider, the solutions that Republicans have to offer, and what Adam Schiff and the Democrat Party has offered up to California for many years.
Oh, here in Washington, on Capitol Hill anyway, Schiff is widely viewed by Democrats as a party bulldozer. He moves ahead and represents their interests at the Capitol, at the White House, on a near daily basis at this point. But he is pretty widely reviled by Republicans, resulting from his legacy in the Trump 1 and 2 impeachment trials. How do you think he plays with California voters?
Well, I think this is a great opportunity for someone like Steve Garvey. He's going to be able to raise money from lots of different avenues, and that's going to be a huge difference maker here in California. We have two of the most expensive media markets in the nation. And Steve Garvey is able to raise those dollars, get his message out, talk to California voters about the issues that are plaguing them. When we see the rising crime, the homeless crisis, we've now spent $20 billion on for it not to get any better, but to get much worse. Our failing education system, where less than 50% of our children are reading at grade level, or the housing and affordability crisis. These are all issues and problems that California Democrats like Adam Schiff have created here in our state. They've got a great opportunity to deliver a message of what California Republicans will do, what someone like Steve Garvey will do if you give him a shot.
So Steve Garvey was a legendary Los Angeles Dodger. He also played for the San Diego Padres. Sports fan here. Do you think his name ID is obviously quite big in California? Do you think he has a shot?
He absolutely has a shot, just as good a shot as anybody. He's an outsider. He's not someone that's necessarily been affiliated with politics. What he has been affiliated with is Californians. You mentioned Los Angeles. I grew up in LA watching Steve Garvey play. I love the fact that he was a Padre as well. There was a school named after him in the Central Valley for many years. So this is someone who has a love affair with the state of California. He also is a person that connects with people. If you have the opportunity to meet or to talk to Steve Garvey, you feel like you're the only person in the room because he wants to know what are the issues that are ailing you and how can he help. He's a wonderful storyteller and a great connector with people. So I think he's got a great shot going into November.
The reality, though, Jessica, is that he's going to come up against Democratic Party heavyweights dominating in the state. Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Governor Gavin Newsom. The entire apparatus is sort of stacked against him in that sense.
Listen, it's still an uphill battle here in California statewide. We are outnumbered by Democrats, but there are some good signs here for California Republicans. Not only have we gained about 680,000 new registrations since February of 2019 when I became chair, but in the last two registration reports we've seen from the Secretary of State, California Republicans have picked up over 100,000 new registrations, while California Democrats have lost 68,000. Decline to states or no party preference have gone down 92,000. This is all while, all of our friends and neighbors are leaving our state for much redder pastures. So there is some good news in here. We picked up 5 congressional seats in the last 2 cycles. We're going on the offense in 3 additional seats. We have more Republicans in California than any other state in the nation. There are opportunities here. Yes, it's an uphill battle. I'm excited that Steve Garvey is the one that's going to be carrying the banner for us Republicans and really Californians come November.
I remember a political outsider with a famous name ending up winning governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger. So we should probably watch this race.
Anything's possible.
Yeah. Jessica Milan Patterson, thanks for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Right. Well, thanks, Jessica. The U.S. response to the war in Gaza now is prompting some Democrats to turn their back on President Biden. Could this become a real political liability for him moving now into the general election? The panel is going to debate that next.
I voted in the DFL, the Democratic Party, as I have for the past many years, and this time I am voting uncommitted. I believe that the war in Gaza and the genocide that Israel is committing is unacceptable, and Joe Biden has not done enough to earn my vote.
Voters from coast to coast making their voices heard on Super Tuesday. Several big issues on the ballot this year, ranging from immigration to the economy. Joining us now for a look at what topics are on the top of the list for voters is Fox News national correspondent Matt Finn. Hello, Matt.
Hey, Matt.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Jillian. In our latest Fox News poll, 1,200 registered voters were randomly selected nationwide, and the number one issue they say they're voting on is the economy. 37% of voters say the economy is the most pressing issue for them, and right behind that, 21% say immigration is the second most important topic. And here in Southern California, some people in Palm Springs discuss their top-of-mind issues.
We need change. We've got to do something about the border. This nation is in serious trouble, and the Biden administration is just a laugh. He's a puppet president. Donald Trump has the answers, and we need him, desperately need him.
I think he's done a terrific job. I think he's brought the unemployment is low, the stock market's up. He's been bringing industry to the red states that have lost industry. He has united our foreign friends, our allies. He's brought them back together, and I feel like he's done a wonderful job.
Now, one interesting development this evening among Democratic voters in Minnesota, a state which has a large population of Muslim Americans. 44,000 Democratic voters there, or roughly 20% of the turnout so far, did not vote for President Biden. Rather, they voted uncommitted as a form of protest, demanding Biden call for a ceasefire in Gaza.
This time I am voting uncommitted. I believe that the war in Gaza and the genocide that Israel is committing is unacceptable, and Joe Biden has not done enough to earn my vote and not done enough to stop the war, stop the massacre.
And in Michigan last week, a similar protest there. More than 100,000 people, or 13% of all voters, also voted uncommitted in that state's Democratic primary. Mike, Jillian.
Matt Finn reporting live. Matt, thanks very much.
Sure.
Well, across the country, a coalition of Democrats have organized a last-minute protest against President Biden's policies. Some claimed they were going to vote as, quote, uncommitted, and have followed through. This instead of picking Biden in Super Tuesday primaries. This effort's building from Michigan, where more than 100,000 people voted uncommitted. Right now, the vote is on the Democratic ballot in Alabama, Colorado, Iowa, Massachusetts, Minnesota, North Carolina, and Tennessee. Some of that frustration comes from the lack of a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel, and folks blaming the president. Joining us live on set is journalist Samantha Jo Roth. President Biden is likely to secure the Democratic nomination. The folks who are doing this, are leading this campaign, say they don't want to be spoilers, but they are trying to send the president a direct, very specific message now while he is in power.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing that it's going really strong, actually. We saw in Minnesota tonight, 20% of that vote was going to those folks who are really upset with what they're seeing in the Gaza Strip. So I think a lot of these voters are looking at the results and saying, they're looking at Sunday. They saw Vice President Kamala Harris talking about a ceasefire, and they're saying, look, maybe our message is actually resonating with the administration. Obviously the Biden administration, they're trying to downplay all of this, and they're saying, look, people are allowed to have their voices heard, and we respect their right to do that. What this all means going into the general election is another question. Will these folks actually get out to the polls and vote for President Biden? A lot of these voters are not going to be voters who will switch sides. We rarely ever see that, but maybe these are people who are so unhappy with what they're seeing with the administration doing that they don't actually get out to the polls. And that is something that administration officials are, thinking about moving into November.
Well, and certainly with the alternative President Trump, right? I mean, he's not going to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. So if the choices are between the two of them.
Exactly right. And we know these elections will come down to 5 or 6 states every time. One of them is Michigan, where I think they really got the White House's attention because we saw, people who were refusing to back the president in the primary there.
Right. And, 100,000 votes, that is not insignificant. Michigan was part of this really important, area that Biden was able to flip. And so to, maybe get a huge chunk of voters who are really unhappy with what they're seeing could potentially be a warning sign for the Biden administration. We also saw, in some of the exit polling, we saw independents in California who were signaling that they were not happy with the Biden administration. So we are seeing some warning signs coming out of these Super Tuesday elections. I will say that, they are trying to downplay this, the Biden administration, saying this is all part of democracy and such. I will note back in 2012, Obama actually did see some similar non-committed votes, but they weren't part of any, organized campaign. And a lot of these votes that we saw in 2012 were actually in states that weren't super decisive in the general election. So it isn't uncommon to see this, but I think certainly the Biden administration should be watching this very closely.
It's maybe not uncommon to see an issue, right, cause divisions within a party. But I would posit that it actually is pretty unusual to see not just a foreign policy issue dividing Democrats, but a foreign war of which the United States isn't even officially a party.
No, it's really interesting because usually what we see is domestic issues are really at the forefront. But this is something where both sides are really energized. Republicans are very energized on this. Democrats are very divided. We'll see how things move forward and how the Biden administration is going to respond in the days and weeks to come, and whether what they will do will actually resonate with Democratic voters. Will it anger them even more? We don't know. But I am interested to see what goes on moving forward.
Be listening for a few lines in that State of the Union address
Yeah.
to see if he tries to thread the needle there.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be watching that.
And
very
the State of the Union now tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because it's Wednesday.
Correct.
In case you didn't know, it's Wednesday. That's more of a reminder to myself than anybody else. But Sarah Jo, thanks so much for coming in and being with us so late at night / early in the morning. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Still so much to unpack from Super Tuesday, including Nikki Haley ruining President Trump's clean sweep, plus what the state of the race means for President Biden's State of the Union this week. We were just talking about it. That's next.
Welcome back. President Biden and Donald Trump sailing to easy victories last night in several states after voters cast their ballots for Super Tuesday. Fox News correspondent Connor Hansen joins us live now with more detail out of New York. Hey, Connor.
Jillian, Super Tuesday results are in, and we're getting a better idea of who will be on the ballot in November. A rematch between Biden and Trump appearing to be the likely scenario.
This was an amazing night.
Shortly after polls closed, both frontrunners took decisive victories in several states. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump aren't leaving much room for their competition. Biden and Trump sweeping states like Arkansas, Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina.
They call it Super Tuesday for a reason. This is a big one. This has never been anything so conclusive.
President Biden releasing a statement saying in part, quote, "Today, millions of voters across the country made their voices heard, showing that they're ready to fight back against Donald Trump's extreme plan to take us backwards." Nikki Haley down in delegate numbers, but not out yet.
All of these people deserve to vote. 16 states want to have their voices heard. Let's let their voices get heard. I think it's as pro-American as it gets. That's where democracy. We don't anoint kings in America. We let people have choices.
She's been gaining traction with independent voters.
I don't want her to quit because I think we all need a voice, as an independent voter especially.
And the next major primary day is March 12th, which includes the battleground state of Georgia, where Trump is also facing an election interference lawsuit. Jillian, Mike?
Well, Connor, Nikki Haley's not given any hints, at least not yet, about what she's planning to do next.
No, not yet. We heard she was watching the results with her team in Charleston, South Carolina, but tonight only putting out a short statement. She's celebrating her win in Vermont as the first Republican woman to win that primary. Certainly a big accomplishment for her. But so far tonight, no interviews, no appearances, no speeches saying what she's going to do. So it's something we'll have to watch closely tomorrow morning, if she'll make an announcement then, or if she'll stay in another week.
All right, Connor in the New York newsroom for us this hour. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Connor. It is a pivotal week for President Biden. He's behind both former President Trump and Nikki Haley in recent polls. But Thursday, he'll have a major opportunity to connect with voters in his State of the Union address in the building behind us. As Fox News correspondent Rebecca Castor reports, he plans to highlight his accomplishments and map out a potential second term.
With President Biden's lackluster poll numbers and an approval rating of 42%, Thursday's State of the Union could easily be the most important speech of his re-election campaign.
No president has ever won re-election in the modern era since polling began, with an approval rating under 50%.
But the State of the Union could offer an opportunity to chart a new course. According to the White House, the president will highlight his economic agenda, protecting women's reproductive rights and uniting the country.
I can tell you that the president is ready. He's ready to take that moment to talk about the State of the Union, to lay out his future vision of how he sees this next year and beyond.
It's a prime opportunity to pitch himself to uncertain voters, especially as the latest Fox News poll finds the majority of Americans say his administration has mostly failed at handling national priorities, such as border security.
The people that came out in overwhelming numbers to elect Biden last time around won't come out.
He is so out of touch with what's going on in the United States.
The high-stakes address comes shortly after Biden's mental fitness was called into question in an unflattering DOJ report, and as he faces criticism within his own party for not doing enough to prevent civilian deaths in Gaza.
He'll have the opportunity to make the case about his age to the American people, but I have confidence in that part of it. I believe what he needs to do is to stop the killing, the suffering.
Yeah. Just as he did last year, Biden is prepping for his big speech at Camp David and has only one public event scheduled ahead of Thursday. In Washington, Rebecca Castor, Fox News.
Let's delve deeper into this topic now with insights from our expert panel. Joining us again are Leslie Marshall, a Fox News contributor, Gianno Caldwell, a Fox News political analyst, and John Bussey, associate editor at the Wall Street Journal. Leslie, as our resident Democrat, what does the president need to accomplish in his State of the Union address?
Oh, there's so much he needs to accomplish. One, people are going to be looking at not just what he's saying, but how he's saying it. And I'm talking about, obviously, not the elephant in the room, the elephant everybody likes to talk about, his age, his mental acuity, his vitality. So how he presents it is very important, but also how he presents himself and who he is representing. He is the president for all people. He needs to tout the accomplishments. I would agree, it was said earlier, on the economy. And believe it or not, things that I have to say my party is not putting out front and center with immigration, for example, that there was a drop in border crossings from December to January, and that continued in February, of more than 50%. That's a headline I would want to see if I were on a border state. Obviously outlining women's reproductive rights and abortion, and the plans with what he wants to do. And the difference between, him and his, alleged opponent coming up. Like with Gaza, for example, you have people, especially in Michigan and the Muslim community, who are upset with him in the handling of that. But you're not going to hear from the Trump administration, supply drop, food drop, ceasefire, two-state solution. So, he can't be all things to all people, but he has to talk about how he can unite not just Democrats, but the nation, how he's going to do it, and what he's going to do in his second term if reelected.
John, the downside, the risks for Biden with this big speech with a lot of eyeballs on it are many. Leslie just laid some of them out. What is the real upside here? What is the best case scenario? Could Biden really hope to get any kind of a political bump from the State of the Union?
Well, it's a fantastic bully pulpit, isn't it, for the president to be able to give a speech to the nation. So he's got to somehow begin to message on the economy. Our polls show that he is not liked for his economic policies, not liked for his border policies. That's a real anchor for him in the election. He's got a message, explain that the inflation that occurred in his administration and that started with the Trump administration was the fault of neither president. It was the fault of the pandemic, and that prices are higher in part because wages are higher and they get passed through to consumers. He has to somehow begin to take some credit but explain the economy to voters. He has to explain the failure of Washington, both under his administration and the Trump administration, to have lasting, effective border policy. He has to somehow address the age question. But I think you're going to see him and Democrats begin to also address Trump's big problem, and that is his character issue. The chaos that you referred to under his administration, the lies about the last election results, and many other things, the handing over of Ukraine to Putin, the lack of support for Ukraine. And the language, the authoritarian, anti-democratic language that former President Trump sometimes uses, violent language, the vermin that are poisoning our blood, referring to his political opponents, but taking a page right out of 1930s Germany. Voters are electing managers to manage their government. I don't think that they're trying to elect an authoritarian or this kind of animus, this constant conflict, and as you pointed out, chaos.
Gianno, if President Biden tries to blame the border crisis on Republicans in Congress, will that backfire?
I mean, H.R. 2, Republicans had a bill that pushed, and we didn't see much pickup there. But no, I think it'll backfire. Why? Because Republicans have been talking about the border for a very long time, and Democrats have been saying there is no crisis. They made that very clear. There was no crisis, but we see over 7 million people that have crossed the border, over 2 million getaways, maybe more than that. But those are the folks that we are aware of. But if we're going to talk about what Biden needs to do, he absolutely needs to speak to his age issue, that he has the stamina, the mental acuity to continue to do the job. He needs to speak directly and very specifically to those uncommitted voters in Michigan. That's a swing state. In 2016, Donald Trump won it by 10,000 votes, a little over 10,000 votes. You got over 100,000 uncommitted people, not to say that all of them would then say, I'm going to stay home, but some certainly will. And then you also have the union folks there. But in addition to that, African Americans are the backbone of the Democratic Party. Typically speaking, in general elections, Democrats will win over 90% of that vote. Those numbers have shifted because of, in part, the immigration issue. People in Chicago saying, hey, we're going to vote for Republicans for the first time ever because Democrats have taken us for granted, and Democrats have taken black folks for granted for over 50 years. So that's not surprising. But there is a number of constituencies that Joe Biden must reach, which are in his base, that he's losing. And that is the interesting part of it. Donald Trump needs to expand his base. Joe Biden needs to really maintain his base and then pick up some other folks. And it doesn't seem to be that those messages are resonating with the American people. And you can see that by the clips that we've been playing all throughout the hour of folks saying, hey, I don't like what Joe Biden has done, and I don't feel like I've been supported by him.
John, there's been reporting on and off, or rumblings on and off for the better part of a month now, that Biden is mulling over this draft executive order on the border. Latest sources unnamed at the White House floating the idea he could announce some kind of executive action on the border during the State of the Union. Do you think he is likely to do that, and do you think it's a good call?
Well, you could make a really good argument that the Democratic administration has made a really kind of lousy decision in not addressing this much earlier in the administration. To take this issue off the table, it's the chief one that Donald Trump is running on. And so doing it at the last minute is better than not doing it at all. It's possible that he could have some kind of executive order in which he does require asylum adjudication to happen outside the border, not within the United States, keeping migrants on the other side of the border, not allowing them into the United States. But how is he going to also mollify those in his party who are liberal and would be concerned about that? I think that at this point, President Biden and the administration is coming around to the fact that they're going to gain more from addressing this issue by bringing in moderate Republicans and independents into their fold, rather than staying the course of doing nothing and alienating those voters, plus, quite frankly, Democratic voters in cities like Chicago and New York who are looking at this and saying, hey, wait a second, we can't afford in our cities to address the increasing problem of illegal immigration into the United States. I think you're going to see some action. The question is whether or not it's decisive, comprehensive, and long-lasting.
All right, well, panel, we got to leave it there, but stand by, because believe it or not, we are going to bring you back yet again soon in the new hour. Thanks so much.
It's going to be awesome.
As always. Well, Trump-Biden matchup is looking like a sure bet now, but could Robert F. Kennedy Jr. end up being a late-hour disruptor? We're going to get into that next.
We have a race to call. There it is. Alaska's caucuses. Former President Trump, overwhelmingly the winner there, 87.6% support to former Governor Nikki Haley's 12%. That's the breaking news of the hour. Thought we'd bring it to you right away. Former President Trump winning Alaska.
There you have it. Well, we also have this. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. fueling speculation he could join the Libertarian Party's presidential ticket. This is coming as he's now seeking to qualify in more states heading into November. The question is, if he does qualify, who would it hurt the most? President Biden, former President Trump? He insists he doesn't want to be a spoiler. Joining us now is Sarah Salop, founder and CEO of 917 Strategy. She also worked for Vivek Ramaswamy in D.C. Sarah, welcome to you.
Thank you for having me.
What are the odds, you think, that he joins the Libertarian Party? It would be his second switch this cycle.
Right. I mean, it's that kind of year. We just keep seeing one turn after another. But at this time, it's like, okay, how far down the rungs are you going to go with the party? First, you're a Democrat, then you're not sure what you are, then Libertarian. But we see so many other Democrats going for, like, Marianne Williamson or uncommitted tonight. So it's nobody knows what's going on, and they just kind of want to get away from Biden and Trump.
So it seems like, well, we know pretty much who the nominees are going to be for each side. The drama could be a third party candidate, and who that hurts in half a dozen battleground states, right?
Right. So there was a poll that came out, I think, middle of last year from Fox, and there was one similar from Rasmussen that said that Trump and then Biden and then RFK Jr. would get at least 11 points for each poll. So he's at least coming in really well. But the Libertarian Party has already had candidates with the celebrity card for the PR push before. Just look at Gary Johnson and Ross Perot, stuff like that. So they're used to it. We want to see it, but nobody just wants to vote for RFK this cycle.
But there is this widespread, I don't know if it's a belief or a hope and optimism that for whatever reasons, this cycle could be really the most significant for a third-party candidate, at least since the 90s when Ross Perot was running.
Right. So one of the big things we need to think about is that all of this year, we're all burnt out, but we need to start seeing people set the stage for 2028. Nikki Haley's already finished herself for 2028. She let everything run dry, burned all the bridges. But we need to see candidates start setting things up, like Ron DeSantis dropping out early because he has political ambitions. If RFK Jr. wants to go ahead and run again in 2028 and then on, he needs to actually start building the movement and figuring out his own lane instead of jumping into a second this year alone.
Was No Labels not really being able to come up with candidates, at least so far, a big disappointment in terms of the third-party candidacy?
That's a really good question, because when you think of No Labels, on my end at least, as a Hill staffer, you sort of think about the more moderate members of Congress or senators, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't really think of them putting forward a presidential candidate. And in my mind, it's only Biden and Trump. No Labels is on the back burner for me.
You mentioned, I just want to pick up on this thread real quick. You said Nikki Haley is out for 2028. But interestingly, I noticed in former President Trump's speech tonight, he didn't take a stab at her by name. I don't think he said her name once during the entire thing, which to me indicates she's still very much in the running to be a VP potential candidate for him. No?
I don't think so. I think that when it comes to Nikki, like, he burned the bridge with her, the staff, everybody's jumping ship, but she went so far moderate with her donors, even the Democrats backing her, that it's just kind of stay away. It's a bit toxic. Deal. Exactly. There are so many other people to look at, like Ben Carson, Tim Scott, Tulsi Gabbard even. So I think she's out of it, just trying to be the humble, good Trump instead of just, what he said about Gavin Newsom tonight.
I was betting Tim Scott for running mate. You think DeSantis may have a shot?
I hope so. I think it'd be a good little mix to be between, like, Tim Scott, Byron Donalds, and Ron DeSantis, because they're all really kind guys, really, like, high moral value. But on the Trump front, they're not going to be the showstoppers like he is. He just kind of needs someone to sit back, watch, and actually fulfill the agenda. So.
All right. Well, Sarah, thanks for staying up late. Thanks for coming into the studio with us. It's great to see you, as always. A pleasure on Super Tuesday. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Stay with Fox News Channel. Our Super Tuesday coverage continues at the top of the hour. Are you ready for another hour?
I'm ready. We'll see you right there.
See you in a moment.
President, what's your message to Democrats who are concerned about your poll number?
My poll numbers, the last 5 polls you guys don't report, I'm winning.
Call it Super Tuesday for a reason. This is a big one. There's never been one like this. There's never been anything so conclusive. November 5th, it's right around the corner.
Former President Trump saying there's never been a Super Tuesday as conclusive as his dominant display tonight, and the current president telling Democrats they should not be concerned with his poll numbers. Hello, I'm Mike Emanuel, and welcome back to our special coverage of this Super Tuesday. Hello, Jillian.
Fancy seeing you here, Mike Emanuel.
It's been great. We're having fun.
We are. We're counting down one more hour with you of live coverage of Super Tuesday. The polls are now closed. Voters in over a dozen states, plus American Samoa, took a trip to the ballot boxes of the biggest day of the 2024 primary race. Over on the Republican side, former President Trump continued his dominant performance. He's now looking to knock challenger Nikki Haley out of the race once and for all. But the former South Carolina governor is not giving up, at least not yet. She picked up a solid victory in Vermont and is vowing to keep bringing the fight.
When 70% of Americans said they don't want Donald Trump or Joe Biden, we're blessed to live in a country where we have elections. And that's what we wanted. I don't know why everybody's so adamant that they have to follow Trump's lead to get me out of this race. You know, all of these people deserve to vote.
On the left, President Joe Biden with a nearly clean sweep. This as this race now fast approaches a 2020 rematch. For more on Super Tuesday coverage, we now turn to Fox News correspondent Kevin Cork, up late with us, or up early, depending on how you look at it. Kevin, good to see you for Hour 3.
Up early, as always. Great to see you. By the way, for the folks at home, Jillian and Mike are my neighbors, like literally right here in the office. Great to be with you guys tonight. Indeed we do. As the great music artist Al Green famously sang, let's stay together. That was the message from former President Trump tonight as he implored GOP voters and the party itself to come together to defeat President Biden. But first things first, he needed to dispatch his former UN ambassador, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, on Super Tuesday. And yep, he did just that on a night where there were delegates aplenty in play. And while Haley did manage a win in Vermont and a few stronger than expected finishes, those accomplishments, frankly, were overshadowed by a number of blowout losses to Mr. Trump, and most importantly, a crushing delegate defeat at the hands of the former president. So where do things stand at this hour? Well, right now, look at the tote board, 820 to 69. You heard Leslie Marshall mention that former President Trump will likely end up over 900 before the night is up, and that means he is well on his way. In fact, some would say he's sailing like Christopher Cross, inching ever so close to the delegates needed to wrap up a third GOP nomination. Amazing when you think about it. A political outsider able to do that and win it 3 times. These numbers, by the way, happen just as we've learned within the hour that Alaska has also been called for Mr. Trump. Meantime, in the Golden State, the stage has been set for a huge Senate battle this coming fall as Major League Baseball Hall of Famer and California GOP star Steve Garvey earns a shot at Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff in a bid to pick up the Senate seat left vacant by the passing of Dianne Feinstein. Schiff and Garvey finishing 1 and 2 in the state. That means they are on the November ballot. Katie Porter, that is, finishing a distant third. And speaking of the Senate, a key departure to tell you about this morning, as Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema has decided not to run for re-election. That means yet another key battle to keep an eye on this fall as the GOP attempts to wrest control of the upper chamber from the Democrats once again. Sinema, the third moderate senator to hang it up this cycle, joining Republican Mitt Romney and Democrat Joe Manchin in leaving the Senate. And speaking of Democrats, President Biden, pretty easy go of it on Super Tuesday, winning all but American Samoa. A sweep, almost, for the president. And so, as mentioned earlier, it would appear it is Biden or bust for the party, barring some unforeseen circumstance between now and November. So, Mike and Jillian, it is the two gentlemen that battled in 2020, getting back after it again, very likely in 2024.
But we got an Al Green reference and a Christopher Cross reference. Well done, office neighbor.
There you go.
Kev.
Thank you, buddy.
Bringing his A game. All right, thanks, Kevin.
You bet.
For reaction to the Super Tuesday results, we are now joined once again by our all-star panel, Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall, Fox News political analyst Gianno Caldwell, and John Bussey, associate editor at the Wall Street Journal. Welcome back to all of you. John, lead us off. Your takeaways from Super Tuesday and as we spring forward towards the State of the Union address.
Yeah, so no big surprises here. I think that this was expected. Both of the main candidates continue to advance even further in their delegate counts. I think the takeaway from this for kind of most viewers of this campaign is what's going to galvanize either of these two candidates. There's a sort of big yawn factor about both of them, right? We've seen them both in action before. We know their policies. There's concerns about age in both cases. What's going to galvanize? What's going to keep people from staying home? And I think you're already seeing concern about that in the fact that support from their base in the 2020 election has eroded for both Trump and Biden. A little bit more for Biden than Trump, but it's eroded for both candidates. So going forward, what's it going to be? Is it going to be a big announcement by the Biden administration on the border? Is it going to be resolution of the fighting in Gaza and big aid by the United States for Gaza? Another conviction of President Trump? There's already been 3 of them. Is that going to be the main galvanizing factor, or is it going to be some slip that shows their age, either one of them? What's it going to be in the next 8-9 months before the election that brings voters who might be staying home in this election back to the polls?
To that point, Gianno, one thing made very clear by the Supreme Court this week is that as much as Democrats might like to take on Trump in the courts, so far they're not having success with it. They're going to have to face him head square on at the ballot box.
Yeah, and I keep hearing John mention the indictments. And I think one thing that people realize, especially those who may be watching, is a lot of people view those indictments as political, just plain and simple. Obviously, everyone is unique and different, but a lot of people do. And you see the base energized more around Donald Trump. And partially, I mean, his poll numbers went up when those things began to happen. I'm not sure what data John is referring to when he says there's an erosion in the Trump base. I've not seen that, so I'm just quite frankly not aware of any erosion at all. And in fact, I think his base around some of these issues have gotten stronger. But what he does need to do is he needs to get those Haley voters, those never Trumper Republicans, because there was a lot of Democrats that went out and supported her. So some of her totals might seemingly be enhanced based on those particular voters. But he needs to get with Nikki Haley's voters, plain and simple. He needs to understand, I think, especially her rhetoric around abortion, because I think that's still a critical issue for many women across the country. And then entering a general election, we know it's not Republicans or Democrats that necessarily are the winners of election. It's the independents that come with you. And suburban women are a very big part of that coalition. So he has to do those things in order to really move forward. And certainly his tone and tenor, those things which were an issue for him in 2020, people thought that he was going to get revenge if he had a second go at it. But this time around, it seems as though, especially with the victory speech on last night, Tuesday being last night, he seemed as though he was a bit more calm in his presentation. And we've seen that in other times prior to yesterday. So there's a lot that they both need to do, but those are the things I think Donald Trump needs to do in order to really increase his chances of winning the general election.
Very quick follow-up to one of your points, Gianno. I asked Sarah Salep at the end of the hour of last hour if Nikki Haley is still in the running to be a potential VP mate to former President Trump. She said, no way, no how. Do you agree with that?
With Donald Trump, you never know. And that's the interesting part about it. Nikki Haley is legitimately a rock star in the Republican Party and across the country. I know there's a lot of people that don't like her in the race right now. They think she should bow out, and that's her choice. But the truth of the matter is she's made a name for herself, a greater one than she ever has, and no one can take that away from her. But then there's the fact that you have no path, and that's what becomes interesting for her. But yeah, VP, I think should still be on the table for Nikki Haley.
I mean, what better way to appeal to Nikki Haley's voters than to bring her on as your running mate?
It's true. If you want to unify the party, she did get serious votes. She didn't win, but she's, the runner-up. So there you go. Leslie, how alarmed are Democrats about these uncommitted voters in some of these battleground states?
Well, first of all, I just want to say, Kevin, if you're listening, I'm really disappointed that you didn't say Lady in Red after sailing with Chris Cross to talk about Nikki Haley. Sorry, I had to just put that out there. Look, when you look at numbers like in Michigan, it still just ended up coming down to the number 2. So even though it was really loud and you see numbers like 100,000, what does it break down to at the end of the day when it comes down to delegates or in a general and electoral college? So I'm not as concerned about that, one. Two, because there may be some type of a ceasefire temporarily or otherwise, or God willing, the hostages released by the time, and this hopefully, God willing, could be over with, and there could be more of a push toward peace, two-state solution, et cetera, by the time the general election is up. I want to weigh in on the vice president. I don't think Nikki Haley is on a short list or a long list of VP choices for Donald Trump. And the reason, at least the Donald Trump that I've seen over the years, is if you say something negative about him, you're not on the good list. You're getting cold for Christmas. And, he likes to surround himself with people that build him up and say positive things about him. And she hasn't been doing that lately. I know some people say she didn't go after him hard enough. And that's another problem that she's had in the past, right? I mean, and we see it now, which is, which Donald Trump is he? The one that you worked for, or the one that now you're saying would be, a threat to democracy? The one that you're saying would be dangerous to take over our country, but then you would stand by his side as a VP? I don't think he'd have her name on the list, but if he did, I don't think it would bring her voters along, by the way, because they're looking for an alternative to Donald Trump, or they're specifically voting for her symbolically to speak loudly against Donald Trump, especially those Democrats like in Vermont that voted for him.
Leslie, Giano, John, still bringing it at this hour. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Former President Trump won all but one Republican presidential nominating poll in a swathe of states on Super Tuesday, brushing aside rival Nikki Haley, really marching closer to a rematch with President Biden. Could this be imminently the end of the road now for Haley? Let's bring in Maura Gillespie, BlueStack Strategies founder and principal. Maura, what do you think? Is she going to drop out tomorrow?
I'm not really sure. I think it was interesting she didn't have any events tonight, but there's 8 months to go until the election. And I just think that it's important for her to present herself in a strong manner. I agree with what the panelists said before about not having her as a VP or even being in contention for it. I don't think that would bode well for her should she have 2028 aspirations. But I think it also highlights, her standing on her own, being a strong-minded, strong-willed woman is really important for Republicans, upcoming Republicans, people who maybe are interested in the party but don't know what party it is and what version of the party it is right now. We need people like Nikki Haley to move the party forward and away from some of the, MAGA hypocrisies that we're witnessing in real time.
Typically, candidates drop out, Maura, because they're out of cash. Struck me that she brought in $12 million in February. So one would think if she wants to continue on for a couple more weeks, see if she can win somewhere else, money-wise, I would think she could do it.
I think money-wise, she could probably make it a little longer, and I would hope that she would. I would, using Vermont and D.C. to try and convince some of those donors to see a benefit into supporting her further, citing the issues coming up, obviously legal bills, legal fees that Donald Trump is having. The other interesting thing is the RNC money, right? I think that's the biggest push Donald Trump's been making, obviously wanting to put his daughter-in-law in charge there, because he wants to be able to tap those resources and have that money fully for him. And so being the only candidate running is what he's looking for. But I think for Nikki Haley, there are a lot of benefits to staying in it and just, maintaining her own lane away from Donald Trump. I think it does give the party some opportunities to move away from Donald Trump for those who want to, but it's also something that Trump and Biden will have to contend with, because they're, like you said, it's not insignificant the number of votes that she received tonight.
Or alternatively, as a political strategy, if you're working for her, you're thinking, well, if she's not going to ultimately prevail, why not leave on a high note? Clinching Washington, D.C., clinching Vermont tonight somewhat unexpectedly, making her the first female GOP candidate to clinch any primaries would seem sort of a strong moment to exit stage left.
Those are strong moments that, she has made history, and those can't be taken away from her. There's still 8 months to go until the election, and we have two candidates who are 78, 80 years old. A lot can happen between now and then, and both have shown, unfortunately, for the American people, that their mental acuity is not operating on all cylinders. So there's a lot to be said between now and November 5th, and I think for the American people's sake, we should have more options than just these two older gentlemen.
All right, well, Maura, we got to leave it there. Thanks for taking time with us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Maura.
Thanks for having me.
Recent polls show President Biden's age is a bigger issue to voters than former President Trump's legal troubles. The two candidates are really only 4 years apart, though, so why is age a bigger issue for Mr. Biden? We will take a look next. President Biden and former President Trump likely to face off again in November, but unlike 2020, age seems to be playing a bigger factor for Mr. Biden than Mr. Trump this go around. So why is that the case, especially when they're only about 4 years apart in age? To shed light on this question, we're joined by Lauren Wright. She's an associate research scholar in politics and public affairs at Princeton University. Lauren, welcome.
Hey guys, how are you?
Hey, Lauren.
So what's your theory on why age is considered a big issue for one candidate, the incumbent president, and not so much for the slightly younger former president?
It's a really good question. I do think a couple of reasons are driving it. The first one is voters notice a change in Biden since 2020. He's slowed down a bit. There's ample videos of his long 40-plus career in Washington that show that he's making mistakes rhetorically that he didn't used to. For Trump, it's a little bit different. He's been saying some things people consider to be outlandish or crazy for quite a while, ever since he's entered politics. And then there's the celebrity element, which I wrote about in my book, Star Power. And that really gives Trump the ability to be evaluated according to different standards than a traditional politician. He's just gets to lean on this status as, I'm a business guy, I'm from the entertainment world. Yes, I say some things here and there, and he gets away, I think, with mistakes rhetorically, which he also certainly makes, but just a style that people have come to know and be very comfortable with, and it's not the same yardstick used for sort of an inside the beltway politician.
Is Trump, Lauren, still able to maintain that image, that brand, even now after he's served as commander-in-chief for 4 years as a kind of Washington outsider?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is what's really fascinating about Trump is I'm not sure what other candidate could have already served as commander-in-chief and gets to still run as a celebrity and run as an outsider. I mean, what more of an insider could you possibly be than someone who's served 4 years in the White House? But that's frankly part of Trump's talent, is convincing people that he's separate from politics. He's still different than all of these career politicians. And in fact, he's not. Most former presidents would run on their experience and their record, but he's still running on some of these personal grievances. He's still running really a lot more like show business than we think about politics in the US, at least in recent history.
Is it your sense that the former president's legal issues may be galvanizing the Republican base behind him? In other words, the other candidates really didn't stand a chance because they feel like that, essentially the government was trying to take him off the ballot?
I don't. And I'm really alone in this, Mike, I think, compared to most analysts. But I actually think it's more the case that Trump is doing well despite his legal troubles. We saw in some polls after the Mar-a-Lago documents news came out, for instance, that weakened his status among Republicans. We saw in the wake of January 6th, his status among Republicans of every group, conservatives, highly educated, non-college educated, dropped off quite a bit. And so I think it's more the case that Trump has been surging. People have been paying more attention. People that might have supported him anyway are still supporting him. Other candidates are sinking in the polls. Those things are occurring simultaneously. But I think it's an impressive amount of support despite these legal troubles, which I still think will be an albatross around his neck in the general election. But not enough to scare away GOP voters, but not helping. I would definitely say not helping. I don't think there's evidence of that.
When we talk about the age issue, we asked the question off the top why it seems to count against Biden but not against Trump, even though they're so close in age. Is part of the answer because when we're talking about age, it's really a euphemism. What everybody means is mental acuity, mental fitness. And that's what they are evaluating these candidates based on. It really has nothing to do with how many years they've been with us. It has to do with the way that they express themselves as a reflection of how they think.
I think that's a great point. Certainly age is symbolic of a lot of things. It's an indicator of a lot of things. And so I think you're right. And another thing I always try to remind my students of and people I talk to about politics is that voters age 65 plus, 75 plus, you're not going to find a group in the electorate that turns out more reliably. And so when Nikki Haley started up with the strategy of the two old men and they're just as bad and they're sort of out to lunch and we need a new generation, you might be alienating the voters you need most, especially as a Republican, because they're a big part of the GOP base. Those younger voters, yes, every year we talk about what factor is Gen Z, millennials going to play in the election, but they only turn out less than 30% of the time. And so it is those older voters who maybe see themselves a little bit in Trump and Biden that are saying, hey, wait a minute, maybe experience counts for something. Maybe it's other things rather than age as the number.
Well, your students are likely to start showing up before long, so Lauren Wright, we should probably let you go. Thanks so much.
See you guys. Bye.
Thanks, Lauren. Well, the Supreme Court handed former President Trump a victory earlier in the week. It's going to keep Trump on all 2024 ballots. More on the historic ruling coming up.
Democrats and Republicans voting on who they want to be president and, of course, other offices on Super Tuesday. Many issues were on the ballot this year, including immigration, health care, and the economy. Here to break down the results for us is Fox News national correspondent Matt Finn. Hello, Matt.
Hey, Matt.
Hello again, Mike and Jillian. In our latest Fox News poll, 1,200 registered voters were randomly selected nationwide. The number one issue they say they are voting on is the economy. 37% of voters say the economy is the most important issue for them. Right behind that, 21% say immigration, the border crisis, the second most important topic. Behind immigration, abortion, and health care. Now, taking a closer look at the border and immigration, 78% of voters in the Fox News poll say the U.S. southern border is an emergency or a major problem. That's down slightly from 85% in October, but much higher compared to February 2019. And President Biden and former President Trump swept Super Tuesday elections across the country. And one interesting development among Democratic voters in Minnesota, the state which has a large population of Muslim Americans. 44,000 Democratic voters there, or roughly 20% of the turnout so far, did not vote for President Biden. Rather, they voted uncommitted. It's a form of protest demanding Biden call for a ceasefire in Gaza.
This time I am voting uncommitted. I believe that the war in Gaza and the genocide that Israel is committing is unacceptable, and Joe Biden has not done enough to earn my vote and not done enough to stop to stop the war, stop the massacre.
So you want to talk about trends or voter issues? That woman speaking to one that might be growing across the country, because in Michigan last week, there was a similar protest. More than 100,000 people there, or 13% of all voters, voted uncommitted in that state's Democratic primary. Mike, Jillian.
Matt, I know you've spent a good amount of time at our southern border looking at the border crisis. Of course, President Biden has a State of the Union address coming up Thursday evening. It makes you wonder if he's going to announce potential executive action or how he's going to handle that immigration issue when you look at that polling number.
Yeah, there's been so much talk and critique over the president about whether or not he would exercise his authority to reinstate some of the Trump-era policies. And along the border, when you talk to Border Patrol, when you talk to agents and law enforcement down there and locals all along the southern border, they wish the president would immediately take some type of executive action. And as we report here constantly, almost every single day, the border is not just a crisis in the southern part of the United States. Nearly every state or so many major cities and small towns are being affected by the border crisis. So I think, all eyes will be on the president tomorrow to see how he addresses and handles the border crisis, or if he's going to continue to pass the buck on to Republicans like he and other Democrats have been doing, Mike.
Matt Finn, live in Los Angeles. Matt, thanks very much.
Sure.
Well, in a historic 14th Amendment case earlier in the week, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously this week that Colorado cannot remove Donald Trump from the primary ballot. Joining us live now is Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall, Fox News political analyst John Caldwell, and Wall Street Journal associate editor John Bussey. Leslie, how do you think this SCOTUS decision played among Democrats turning out last night?
I honestly don't think it weighed in on a substantial number of voters. And the reason is there are many Democrats like myself that weren't surprised at the ruling because, do you want the states to make a decision as to who can with an insurrection, and then it becomes, a slippery slope, if you will, or a Pandora's box, who can and cannot be on the ballot. And, actually that, the court, talked about having more, more specifics and more decisive action. That action should come from Congress, via legislation to be more specific with regard to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So I'm really not surprised. I mean, when you heard the arguments, from, the legal scholars, leading up to this decision by the court, I think most people knew that this was going to happen. And I don't think the voters in Colorado were that surprised based on that surprised on the SCOTUS decision.
Gianno, do you think the action by these individual states and then the reaction from the Supreme Court fired up Republican voters in places like Colorado?
I mean, it clearly has for any of these court cases, but specifically this one, because this one you can really and truly point to the political nature of it. It appears to me like revenge politics, if you will. Many of these Democrats, Secretary of States, who want to help their own party but yet disenfranchise their own voters, are the ones who should pay a political price. And for those voters in those states should say, we're not going to reelect you for you playing politics with our votes. And the truth of the matter is, I know that there's a lot of Democrats that want to ensure that Donald Trump cannot win. And this was one of the strategies that happened to not work for them. But certainly if it would have been something that worked, then I could see on the other side, even Republicans saying, hey, maybe we should do X, Y, and Z for the next election. And that's not right. It's un-American and it's undemocratic. So I'm glad that the justices chose to move this way.
John, what about motivating Republicans headed to the polls last night?
Well, this was a clear win for Donald Trump. It was a big one, too. It was kind of predicted. We sort of knew that it was going to happen, but let's not take anything away from that. It was a big win. It was a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court. So not only is he back on the ballot, but he gets to kind of go before his rallies and say, I won, which is always a good thing for any candidate to be able to say. But Donald Trump being in court is not a good thing during a campaign season for a candidate. It allows for things to come out. For example, in the appeals court, where his lawyers were arguing that he should not be tried for for plotting to overturn the election and in 2020. One of the appeals court judges said, well, wait a second, you're saying that presidents should have ultimate immunity. Does that mean that he could hire a SEAL team or command a SEAL team to go assassinate one of his political rivals? And his lawyers on behalf of Donald Trump said, yes. Say what? And of course, the appeals court shot that one down, said, no, you don't have ultimate immunity. Our polling shows that moderate Republicans and independents are watching these cases and might decide, they say, to vote against Trump if another conviction comes down the road. He's been convicted of business fraud, financial fraud, sex abuse, defamation in 3 cases with juries in some of those cases. He has decided, yes, that has galvanized his base who say, well, these are political, decisions. They're not. They're by juries and by courts. And Trump has attacked the judges, attacked the courts, and in so doing, once again, attacked the rule of law in the United States. That doesn't sit well with independents and moderate Republicans. He's got to watch out for that.
Leslie, when we look back at the midterms, Democrats were very effective at animating their voters on the issue of abortion rights. There's some talk about whether they go back to that theme again this year. Is it possible, though, that pocketbook or wallet issues may outweigh that kind of right?
It depends on where you are and what type of voter you are. Obviously, for female voters, the issue of women's reproductive rights are going to weigh, much heavier than, let's say, somebody on, on the border where immigration is going to be, a larger issue. The economy is always, if not the top 2 among voters, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, or independents. And, like John had even said earlier, when you hear Republicans, our own Larry Kudlow, who said, look, Biden should take a victory lap on this. And I think part of the problem is when you look at the polling is the message of what's happened in the economy and how it's improved and how that will, I hate to say trickle down, but, trickle down to the voter and what they can expect and why some people aren't feeling it, because there's facts and then there's feelings, right? But when it comes to women's reproductive rights, I don't think anybody, I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, should be a one-issue candidate, nor do I think a voter should be a one-issue voter. But when it comes to abortion, that is something that is a very strong win for my party. Nikki Haley said something that I thought was very right. She said that Republicans need to learn how to be pro-life yet pro-woman, and they really haven't done that yet. And when you have the fear of, some of the legislation that we're seeing, whether it's, with regard to IVF or to traveling or to birth control or the morning after pill, and the list goes on in states, and then talk of, a federal ban, that can be very effective to motivate voters to come out and to vote Democrat, to vote for Joe Biden. So they should use it.
Panelists, still going strong. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
It's been a rough week for President Biden when it comes to his polling numbers. Now some are wondering if he should drop out to save the Democratic Party's chance of winning in November. But is it too late? We'll look into that next.
Welcome back. Another race to call for you. The Utah caucuses are in. The results are on your screen. Donald Trump coming in with 58.2% of the vote. Nikki Haley with 40.7%, a difference of just about 11,421 votes in the state.
Well, with President Biden underwater in many recent polls, it begs the question, what if he drops out? The president would have until March 19th, some suggest perhaps later to do so. But with former First Lady Michelle Obama shutting down any and all speculation, who could take his place on short notice? Let's ask former House Oversight Committee Staff Director Julian Epstein. Julian, welcome back. So what do you make of all this speculation about could he drop out? And there was all this excitement about what about the former First Lady Michelle Obama? Your thoughts?
Well, after the disastrous convention in 1968, the Democratic Party changed the rules for delegates in 1972. So we have pledged delegates now. What that means is the delegates that Joe Biden gets by March 19th have to vote for him in the first ballot. A lot of people think that's the cutoff date as to when he has to drop out. That's incorrect. Joe Biden could still drop out in April. He could still drop out the day before the convention. If he drops out in April, what would happen is that you would have a furious grassroots campaign by people that want the job to go to the state conventions where the delegates are actually selected after the primaries to try to win delegates there. If Joe Biden were to drop out, say, on the eve of the convention, then you would have chaos. You would essentially have an open convention. It would probably take 3 or 4 ballots. You would have a massive, campaign, social media campaign, on the ground campaign to win delegates. It would be chaos. So that's, there are scenarios where he could drop out, certainly in April or even up to the convention, and you could have an open party fight. I think the way that happens is you see more polls like you saw in the New York Times on Sunday, where you see 2/3 of his voters that voted for him in 220 don't want to vote for him, don't want him at least as the nominee. You see black voters now at about 23% for Donald Trump, Hispanic voters 46%. At some point you get party elders that go, I think, most likely to Jill Biden, and they would say, you wanted to be Franklin Roosevelt, we're worried you're going to be Jimmy Carter. This is not going to end well, and we've got to find an alternative.
But isn't that just wishful thinking? I mean,
probably.
He's not dropping out, right? Barring some catastrophic, unforeseeable situation. The party is standing firmly behind him in front of closed doors, publicly facing. Anyway, there's no real chance he's dropping out.
In front of closed doors is the
in front
key. Is the key phrase there.
Say behind closed
doors. Behind closed doors, there are many that are saying that they wish there was some way to find another candidate. They may like what he has done as a senator in his first term, but they would like to see another candidate. They're very worried that he may be. He said he's the only candidate that can beat Donald Trump. They're worried he might be the only candidate that can't beat Donald Trump. So I think it is unlikely, to your point, Jillian, that he is going to drop out. But I think there is a slim possibility that enough people start looking at these numbers. And again, they go to not directly to the president, but to Jill Biden, I think, who is in many ways the decision maker on this.
Biden whisperer.
The Biden whisperer, and would say, this is the better way out. I don't think it's likely, but I think it's possible. And, I think this is one of the problems of groupthink. I mean, Biden said in January of 2023 that he was going to run. That was the time for the party elders. I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal saying he should get out of the race a year ago. And I got a lot of guff from it from my Democratic friends. And I think that was a time for the party influencers to step up and say, we are not going to go along with groupthink. We're not going to go along with the easy way. We're going to take the hard position, and we're going to tell him that there's got to be a graceful way to step aside. That door, to your question, has largely closed, but there's still a crack in it.
Julian Epstein, thank you so much for staying up late with us.
Thanks for having me.
Great to get you back for round 2 also.
Thanks, I enjoyed it.
Well, so we're back with the panel now, bringing them in for their final thoughts. Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall, Fox News political analyst John O'Caldwell, and John Bussey. We're going to take it around the table now. John, let's start with you.
Well, I think you're going to see a lot of. I think you're going to see a lot of arguments that have been made in the campaign up until now, repeated in the next several months. That it's time for Biden to recognize his age and pass on leadership to the next generation. Maybe former President Trump as well, and attacks on former President Trump for his threats to democracy and the rule of law. But it's going to be a fight over the middle now. Conservative Democrats, liberal or moderate Republicans, and independents. Who's the most effective at galvanizing that group to be able to win? And remember, we are electing managers here. We're giving employment contracts 2 years, 4 years, 6 years to elected officials to fix things, right? To fix our borders, our potholes, our national security. And that is what's going to appeal to that moderate voter, not the invective. So who is best at fixing and can convince the moderate reporters and independents that they're here to properly manage, who's good at fixing and not fighting, I think that candidate is going to have the leg up in the election.
Leslie, closing thoughts from you?
We have had in the past few election cycles pretty much what we are having come up now. We have a very divided country. It's almost split down the middle. Majority of Republicans are going to vote for Donald Trump, who will be the GOP nominee. Majority of Democrats will vote for Joe Biden, who will be, sorry, Mr. Epstein, the Democratic nominee. There's no crack. And Gavin Newsom is not waiting in the crack. He's my governor. I have that on good authority. But, you know, you're looking at, again, about 5 states and a slither of voters in those states. And you know what's not top 5 among voters' minds, not just in those states and in that sliver? The age of either of these candidates. The issues they really do care about, however, are the economy, immigration, abortion, and democracy, protection of democracy and crime. So those are the 5 issues that both of these people running have to get to that sliver within those 5 states. And again, it's a numbers game. And the first one, who gets to that number gets over the finish line. They're going to get the job or remain in the job. My bet would be it will be the latter, and it will be Joe Biden again, not only as candidate, but as president for a second term.
Quick follow-up for you, Leslie. President Biden didn't speak tonight, obviously, but his campaign put out a statement. They said President Trump is backwards looking. What's your response? Do you think that's the right way to go with this campaign? We just got a couple of seconds.
Well, I think a lot of people liked when Barack Obama had said, if you want to go forward, you put the car in drive, which is a D. If you want to go backward, you put it in reverse. I think that's what they were talking about. This isn't like, deplorables, a basket of deplorables, that kind of thing. I personally can't stand the mudslinging. Sadly, that's where we're at in today's elections. I want people to focus on their record and on the issues.
All right, panel. Gianno, I'm so sorry. Thought we had a couple more minutes. We got to leave it there. We owe you one. We will bring you back as soon as we can. We love all of you guys. Thank you so much for staying up late. Thanks to everybody at home for staying up late with us as well, trusting us with your extended Super Tuesday evening coverage.
That concludes our Super Tuesday coverage. Have an awesome Wednesday and a great rest of your week. Good night from Washington.